my name now is Joan Salter, and I'll be 74 years next week. Well, basically, I was born in Belgium in February 1940 to Polish Jewish parents, and I was 3 months old when Belgium was invaded, and my father was taken, and then we made separate journeys down through Paris, through Vichy, and eventually over the mountains into Spain. And I was then sent to America, where I was fostered by a family, and my name was changed and my background was changed. And my parents did survive the war, and in 1947 we were reunited, and my sister and I came to England to live with them. Well, it's interesting because my parents were both Polish, and Poland had had a lot of pogroms and stuff, and I think my father's instinct was always that things would be dangerous. And even before I was born, they were living in Paris, and Paris had not been invaded, but his instinct told him France would be invaded, and he thought Belgium would stay neutral. So my father really realized, even in the late 30s, that Hitler was going to get his own way. And because, you know, the minute Poland was invaded, there were the mass deportations to the camps. There were letters going backwards and forwards, so people did know what was going on in Poland. But he thought Belgium would be safe, so that's why they went to Belgium. But it was invaded in May 1940.
Do you ever find it difficult when you're talking about your experiences in regards to, because you weren't necessarily put into the concentration camps yourself and you were a child, do you think you get approached differently about the matter in any way because you don't necessarily remember it?
Yeah, people say, oh, you know, you don't remember it, so it didn't affect us. And a lot of the child survivors, even those who came, for instance, from Theresienstadt, there were a group brought over here, and the children were sort of marginalised as, oh, it didn't really affect you. You know, they lost their parents, they'd lived in a camp which supposedly was a model camp, you know, but, you know. And the child survivors were marginalised, which is why we have our own organisation, because we understand that our lives were turned upside down. And I mean, some of our members actually were in the camps. One of the older ones, who was in Hungary, she was 15 when Hungary was invaded, and so she actually was in Auschwitz. My American parents died, oh gosh, over 25 years ago, but I have a foster sister, and we've always looked upon each other as sisters, because I did go back and forwards between my two families. And, you know, when her children got married, I went over, and nowadays with Facebook and everything, so she and I have got quite a close relationship. Yeah. Oh, well, it was completely surreal. You know, when you're brought up in a family, also in those days, adoption was a stigma besides anything else. So I don't think I was aware that they weren't my family. I sort of had vague understanding because I had a sister who would come and visit, and I didn't quite understand that. And I did have vague memories of things, but, you know, as a child you think it's dreams or something. So when I was told I didn't belong to that family, you know, and then I came to these strange people. My mother and I didn't even have a common language. They were completely impoverished, very highly strung and nervous. In another book where someone else has written about me, she actually calls it was like going to Mars, and it was. It was just a different world. And my parents had lost everyone, and my father did talk about it, but in a way the Holocaust just wasn't talked about, and it was stigma. You know, we didn't want to be foreigners, you know, we wanted to be normal. So in that way it was sublimated for about 20-30 years, and this is very common experience amongst the child survivors. Eastern Europe was under the Iron Curtain. Now, the one member of either of the families that did survive was my aunt, who survived in Russia, then went back to Poland. And actually, in 1955, she had married a camp survivor, and they had a young child. And in 1955, they were allowed out of Poland. And her husband had an older child from his first marriage. His first wife had died in the camp, who lived in Paris. So they came out to Paris. And my mother would not go. She just couldn't go. And for my father, it was traumatic, but this was the one member. So he actually dragged me very unwittingly to Paris, because I had spent a lot of time in America, and in the 50s, America had an absolute phobia about communism and everything, and as a child, I absorbed that. And my aim was to go and live in America. So my father takes me to Paris to meet my communist aunt off the train. And I was absolutely terrified. I honestly thought the CIA would know I had a communist aunt and I would never get back into America. And I remember the scene so well. My father, his sister, who was completely broken, these two old people, they were probably in their 40s, they came out with this tiny little boy, and all their possessions were wrapped up in a sheet, just like images you see of Russia, you know. And they came, and we went to the son's apartment, and my father, and it was completely illogical, because in England we had a two-room apartment. You know, my sister and I slept in the sitting room, and they had a bedroom, and there was a kitchen. We had to go to public baths for a bath, you know. But he, in his head, he was the head of the family, and she was his little sister, and he wanted them to come to England. And I'll never forget, the two of them had such a row. I mean, all they'd been through, they had a stinking row. My father got up, pulled me out, got a taxi, we came to the train, came back to England, and that was that. Later on in life, my mother was able to go to Paris, but they never went to Poland. I went to Poland for the first time about 10 years ago, to the town where he came from, and I actually now go virtually every year. They have a ceremony in June, the week that the most of their Jews were deported. And they have a ceremony in the woods and round different parts of the town, and I go nearly every year. I went to the camp, Belschitz, the death camp, where my family from Tarnow would have gone, and I've also been to Warsaw, but in Warsaw was badly damaged, and there's virtually no documentation or anything. But I've been to Treblinka, which was the camp outside. And in a way, it was like me reclaiming my family, even though I hadn't been born in Poland, and letting them know that I still remembered them. Yeah. I don't struggle with it. It's almost as though it happened to somebody else. It's very interesting. Occasionally, sometimes there's two of us speaking in the same school or something, but not at the same time. And I'll listen to someone else's experience, and I find I just start crying. And yet when I speak about mine, it's as though I'm speaking, I think it's a wall we put up against, you know, we're not going to get upset about it and whatnot. But and I was well in my 40s when I started looking, and it was a journey, moving on, also meeting other child survivors. Because the older survivors just patronised us. Oh, you were only children. So it was only other child survivors that when we spoke to each other, although it's more parallel speaking, you know, than speaking to each other. Yeah. But it was like sharing the same emotions and understanding a sort of emotional shorthand. And that was very important. Yeah, that was part of the taking it all on board. I think the one point of having a survivor is that they actually see a human being it happened to, and they can relate, especially when I speak in schools, because it's a child's journey, and I talk about my problems with my sister, you know, and I say, how many of you fight with your sisters and brothers, and everybody hand go up and whatnot, so they can relate. So when they hear about it, perhaps they can empathise more than if they just think. And very sadly, you know, I mean, after the war, when they first started talking, they said, oh, never again, but we see it happening everywhere. And I think it's important to understand how quickly ordinary people can turn into, you know, monsters. And perhaps if even a few of the people we speak to, if it makes a difference to them, if they think, you know, for instance, if somebody's bullying somebody because they're different, if they can just say, don't do it, then it's served a purpose, because it's the same thing. It's the fear of someone who's different, you know, and stereotyping. Also, that it's an unfortunate human nature that people that are insecure in their own skin, they need to have a go at somebody else to sort of say, oh, well, you see, I'm more important than they are. And that can so quickly, you know, just escalate. My two daughters, because my parents were still alive, it was interesting, because when I got married in the early years, I mean, my parents with this harsh accent and everything, and my children, we'd go to them, but the Holocaust wasn't part of my life very much at that stage. And my older daughter is much more sort of family and background orientated, and she's very interested. My younger daughter, it really amazed me when she was at Reading University. She actually asked me to come and speak about it, and I was absolutely amazed, because she isn't that interested in being Jewish or anything. And my grandson, he's 10 now, and interestingly enough, his dad's dad also came from Vienna, so was a refugee. So he has that background, but we don't make a big thing about it.
We organised a Holocaust talk last year, and it was really successful, and we wanted to do it again, and I'm really glad how it went.
A personal story, usually you get it from somebody who's been in a camp, but it's good to see that there's stories there of people who were actually part of the Holocaust that wasn't in the camps as well, and it's almost unheard from history a lot of times.
I thought it was very interesting. It's very emotional listening to how someone goes through something like that. I mean, I think in our lives we don't quite realise that even though it was only a generation or two ago, that these things actually still happened, and they still happen now.
If tension and other things come up in the future, the only way we can stop something like a genocide or a Holocaust happening is to learn from the past. So if we can't look at the past, then how can we know how other things turn out?